Can you hear me now? I think that's good. I think I accidentally muted my mic. So, oops. But you should be able to hear me now. And I was just saying that links for anything I'm going to be putting in the Discord. And if you are interested in looking in these topics at all, any more in depth, it'll be there for you to follow down the rabbit hole. It's a little low. Alright, and I hope that works because that's all the way up. There is desktop audio, but it's turned down pretty low, so that shouldn't be affecting too much. And should work out okay. Now, so first article. New study calls into question the importance of meat eating in shaping our evolution. So what diet early hominins ate is a pretty big topic of discussion, and knowing what they ate is really difficult because all we have is the fossilized remains, and the information that we can extract from them is limited. But we can get a lot more than one might think with things like stable isotopes, or even dental calculus, which is like the plaque in your teeth. It solidifies and just preserves all that you ate. Quintessential human traits such as large brains first appear in Homo erectus nearly 2 million years ago. This evolutionary transition towards human-like traits is often linked to a major dietary shift involving great meat consumption. There are like multiple typos. There's no space here, there's no space here. I don't know who wrote this, but you need to edit a bit more. A new study published today in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, however, calls into question the primacy of meat eating in early human evolution. While the archaeological evidence for meat eating increases dramatically after the appearance of Homo erectus, the study authors argue that this increase can largely be explained by greater research attention on this time period, effectively skewing the evidence in favor of the meat made us human hypothesis. Okay. Generations of paleoanthropologists have gone to famously well-preserved sites in places like Olduvai Gorge, looking for and finding breathtaking direct evidence of early humans eating meat, furthering this viewpoint that there was an explosion of meat eating after 2 million years ago. Andrew Barr, an assistant professor of anthropology at the George Washington University and lead author on the study, said, however, when you quantitatively synthesize the data from numerous sites across eastern Africa to test this hypothesis, as we did here, that meat made us human evolutionary narrative starts to unravel. Barr and his colleagues compiled published data from 9 major research areas in eastern Africa, including 59 site levels dating between 2.6 and 1.2 million years ago. They used several metrics to track hominin carnivory, the number of zooarchaeological sites preserving animal bones that have cut marks made by stone tools, the total count of animal bones with cut marks across sites, and the number of separately reported stratigraphic levels. Okay. The researchers found that when accounting for variation in sampling efforts over time, there is no sustained increase in the relative amount of evidence for carnivory after the appearance of H. erectus. They note that while the raw abundance of modified bones and the number of zooarchaeological sites and levels all demonstrably increased after the appearance of H. erectus, the increases were mirrored by a corresponding rise in sampling intensity, suggesting that intensive sampling rather than changes in human behavior could be the cause. Okay, so we're just gathering more data for this time period than there are others, so it just makes it seem like there's more. I've excavated and studied cut marks fossils cut mark fossils for over 20 years, and their findings were still a big surprise to me. Brianna Pobiner, sorry if I say your names wrong, I try, a research scientist in the Human Origins Program at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History and co-author on the study, said, "This study changes our understanding of what the zooarchaeological record tells us about the earliest prehistoric meat eating. It also shows how important it is that we continue to ask big questions about our evolution, while we also continue to uncover and analyze new evidence about our past." In the future, the researchers stressed the need for alternative explanations for why certain anatomical and behavioral traits associated with modern humans emerged possible. Hold on, 1 second. Sorry, just 1 second. Let me see. Where is it? Be right back. Coming back. Sorry about that. Just needed to close a door so that noise didn't interrupt us, like the opening of a soda can. Okay. In the future, the researchers stressed the need for alternative explanations for why certain anatomical and behavioral traits associated with modern humans emerged. Possible alternative theories include the provisioning of plant foods by grandmothers and the development of controlled fire for increasing nutrient availability through cooking. The researchers cautioned that none of these possible explanations currently have a strong grounding in the archaeological record, so much work remains to be done. I would think this study and its findings would be of interest not just to the paleoanthropology community, but to all the people currently basing their dietary decisions around some version of this meat-eating narrative. Okay, so they're talking about like the carnivore diet that people have been talking about lately, and so carnivore, let me see, there's several out there. There's carnivore, there's the keto, there's, I think it's called like the lion diet or something, that people trying everything they possibly can in order to try and feel better. You can't blame them if they're not really feeling good after eating a bunch of junk food or something. Our study undermines the idea of eating large quantities of meat drove evolutionary changes in our early ancestors. In addition to Barr and Pobinar, the research team included John. Okay. I don't know if it quite undermines it, because the number of zooarchaeological sites isn't the only thing that tells us meat consumption increased with Homo erectus. There's actually a lot more data to it. If you look at stable isotopes, it shows an increase in meat consumptions through nitrogen deposit in the teeth and in the bones. I mean, Neanderthals have very high levels of nitrogen, and there's actually I won't get into that. But that's gonna take it too far. But there's the number of zooarchaeological sites, so how many times we find cut animal remains. There's the amount of those animal remains that we find, and then there's the stable isotope data. There's, cave paintings. There's a lot that goes along with this theory. It's not just that we have more sites. Also, cooking does change your food quite a bit, and that is one idea of why our brains started to grow with so much with Homo erectus is we began cooking our food, which then there's a whole different process and probably social cohesion going on. But even when you're cooking plant products, it's difficult to reach the level of nutrients and calories needed to sustain the average human body, let alone what the body is going to require from a hunter-gatherer. Modern times in the US, sitting on your butt at a computer screen, you're not going to require as much as someone who is needing to walk miles and miles a day, or move sites, or even hunt down some gazelle or something. I wouldn't say this really puts doubt on the hypothesis. I'd say it definitely brings up some important questions of why we don't have as much data from that time period, and it could definitely just be the environment of that time prior to the 2.5 million years ago, because when the Homo genus formed, the Earth was going through a lot, particularly Africa was going through a lot of environmental changes. It was really drying out, and you have little like oases going on that you'd have to take into account. So if they weren't really that good for preserving, that's a big deal. Maybe we do just have a lot of data from one particular time period, and we need to try and clear that up, and it seems like that's a flaw that they've come across, but I wouldn't say it puts doubt into the hypothesis itself about the importance of meat in the human diet, and in terms of evolutionary processes. They did bring up like the modern all meat diets. I don't know, this kind of seems like it was put together to try and denounce those diets, sort of, which they are pretty extreme diets. Our leafy greens are good. We are omnivores. We need both. Our teeth show it, our gut shows it. So I think taking the extremes of either being full carnivore or going full herbivore, or as we call them, vegetarians and vegans, I think they're both a little too on the extreme side. Everybody's going to need a slightly different diet. Some people can't do a lot of meat, it kind of screws with their stomach, or they're having like high cholesterol, I guess, or many other like dietary restrictions that someone can come across, and so everybody's going to have slightly different diets, and the diets within different cultures too is pretty big thing. I mean, if you're living in an area that really just doesn't have a lot of greens there, such as the Inuit and other cultures super far north, you rely on the meats a lot more than someone who lives farther south in a really lush green area with lots of foliage, like the Amazon or something. So, yeah, I definitely think this is an interesting article, but a little flawed. When a winter storm triggered one of the deadliest disasters in DC history. It was seemingly inconsequential homework assigned that saved Charles Lyman III's life on a frigid night in January 1922. Then a 14-year-old prep school student, Lyman, was visiting family in Washington, D.C. when a major storm buried the city under almost 2.5 feet of snow. Dang. On Saturday, January 28th, the second day of the blizzard, Lyman's cousin David suggested spending a cozy evening watching a movie at the Knickerbocker Theater in nearby Lanier Heights. This is like a story. Lyman told him to go ahead with a friend, Kirkland Duke, and promised to join the pair after finishing his work. Okay, trudging through the snow about a half block away from the theater, Lyman heard a sudden boom, followed by a chorus of terrified screams. The Knickerbocker's roof had come crashing down, overwhelmed by the weight of record-breaking snowfall. Oof. Dang. In total, the collapse killed 98 people, including David and Kirkland. Oh, man. And injured another 133, according to Kevin Ambrose, author of a 2013 book on the blizzard. The tragedy marked the city's deadliest single-day disaster. A century later, however, the Knickerbocker Theater remains little known among the denizens of the nation's capital. Wow. So, got some pictures here. This is the inside, everybody standing around, some people on stage, all collapsed. It doesn't look that great. And then, we got some collapsing going on here. Wow. So our friend Lyman lived to 69 in the Navy. Nice. Had some children. Oh, we got a nice picture. Old-timey car, bunch of snow. Man, I bet those vehicles didn't do well in the snow. I wonder what like the rate of car crashes were in snow or something like that. And I don't just mean like deadly car crashes. A lot of times, I don't know if you guys live in snowy areas, but you see people who just like slid off onto the side of the road and are in a ditch and can't get out, so they need someone with a truck to come or tow them out. And yeah, I'm curious if that was common with these type of vehicles, or if people just decided that's not worth it, I'm gonna walk. So yeah, interesting. That's really, really sad though. Oh, I'll just meet you there, and they die. People trying to walk. Oh. Okay, anyways, next. Oh, that's not anything. Okay, climate change in the early Holocene. New insight into how our early ancestors dealt with major shifts in climate is revealed in research published today, the 27th of January. It reveals new radiocarbon dates show the large early Holocene cemetery of Yuzhny Oleni Ostrov at Lake Onega, some 500 miles north of Moscow, previously thought to have been in use for many centuries, was in fact used for only 1 to 2 centuries. Moreover, this seems to be in response to a period of climate stress. Let's see where this is. I mean, we know it's in like this Moscow, Onega. Lake Onega. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's what I'm saying. So let's see. Here we have it. A lot of little lakes around here. Nice. Streakiness going on. Like it. Okay, so that's where we're at, right here. Bam. And we've got Russia. There's Moscow. A little northwest of them. Okay. It reveals new radiocarbon dates showed the large early Holocene cemetery used 1 to 2 centuries rover. Okay, period of climate stress. The team believes the creation of the cemetery reveals a social response to the stresses caused by regional resource depression. at a time of climate change. Lake Onega, as the second largest lake in Europe, had its own ecological resilient microclimate. This would have attracted game, including elk, to its shores, while the lake itself would have provided a productive fishery. Because of the fall in temperature, many of the region's shallower lakes could have been susceptible to the well-known phenomenon of winter fish kills caused by depleted oxygen levels under the ice. The creation of the cemetery at the site would have helped to find great membership for what would have been previously dispersed bands of hunter-gatherers, mitigating potential conflict over access to the lake's resources. But when the climate improved, the team found the cemetery largely went out of use, as the people presumably returned to a more mobile way of life and the lake became less central. Their behavioral changes to what could be seen as a more complex social system with abundant grave offerings was situation dependent, but they suggest the presence of important decision makers, and say the findings also imply that early hunting and gathering communities were highly flexible and resilient. The results have implications for understanding the context for the emergence and dissolution of socioeconomic inequality and territoriality under conditions of socio-ecological stress. I wish they wouldn't always do this with harder words to say. It makes it harder. Okay. Radiocarbon dating of the human remains and associated animal remains at the site reveals that the main use of the cemetery spanned between 100 and 300 years. That's still a pretty good long time for it to be used. Centering on 8,250 to 8,000 BP, so before present. This coincides remarkably closely with the 8.2 Ka dramatic cooling event. So this site could provide evidence for how these humans responded to a climate-driven environmental change. The Holocene has been relatively stable in comparison to current events, but there are a number of climate fluctuations recorded in the Greenland ice cores. The best known of these is the 8,200 years ago cooling event, the largest climatic downturn in the Holocene, lasted 1 to 2 centuries. But there is little evidence that the hunter-gatherers who occupied most of Europe at this time were much affected, and if they were, in what specific way. One of the largest early Holocene cemeteries in northern Eurasia, with up to 400 possible graves, 177 of which were excavated in the 1930s by a team of Russian archaeologists. Based on their work, the cemetery site has an important position in European Mesolithic studies, in part because of the variation in the accompanying grave offerings. Some graves lack these entirely, to those with abundant and elaborate offerings. So, talking about, who supported it and everything. So, interesting. That's cool. Just some more environmental changes and the amazing ability of humans to adapt. We are very good at it. I mean, we occupy almost all parts of the earth, and that is a feat of its own. That is amazing that we can do that. Okay. Bronze Age women alter genetic landscape of Orkney, study finds. An international team led by researchers at the University of Huddersfield has used ancient DNA to rewrite the history of the Orkney Islands to show that Orkney actually experienced large-scale immigration during the early Bronze Age, which replaced much of the local population. Okay. Let's look that up. Get a map, Orkney Island. Okay, why are you just on the ocean? Okay, there we go. we go. So we got a little checkpoint there. The UK, Ireland, France, Spain, Norway, we're up in here. So pretty far north, really. Okay. So we're looking up top of UK. So the project was a close collaboration between genetic researchers in Huddersfield and Edinburgh, led by Professor Martin Richards and Dr. Ciaradwin Edwards. I am sure I butchered that name, and I'll say Dr. Edwards, and archaeologists living and working on Orkney. Orkney is world famous for its archaeological heritage. Around 5,000 years ago, during the Neolithic period, when farming first took hold, it was a hugely influential cultural center. Oh, sorry about that. With many superbly preserved stone dwellings, temples, and megalithic monuments, and a style of ceramics that appears to have spread out across Britain and Ireland. It has even been described as Britain's ancient capital. Over the 1,000 years that followed, however, as Europe moved into the Bronze Age, it has been widely viewed that somehow Orkney became left behind. Its influence dwindled and the islands became more insular. But with fewer archaeological remains to study, much less was known about this time. By combining archaeology, I'm not speaking well, in the study of ancient DNA from Bronze Age human remains from the links of Nordland site on the remote northern island of Westray, researchers now know much more about this time than ever before, and the results have come as a great surprise to geneticists and archaeologists alike. Firstly, despite the supposed insularity, the team has shown that Orkney experienced large-scale immigration during the early Bronze Age, which replaced much of the local population. The new arrivals were probably the first to speak Indo-European languages and carried genetic ancestry derived in part from the pastoralists living on the steppe lands north of the Black Sea. And I'll just pull it up for you. Okay. So looking, this is the Black Sea, north of the Black Sea, so looking more at like Ukraine and Russia, maybe some Moldova. Yeah, so that's a pretty good distance there. Okay. This mirrored what was happening in the rest of Britain and Europe in the 3rd millennium, but the researchers found a fascinating difference that makes Orkney highly distinctive. Across most of Europe, the expansion of the pastoralists on the eve of the Bronze Age was typically led by men, with women being sucked into the expanding populations from local farming groups. But in Orkney, the researchers found exactly the opposite. The Bronze Age newcomers were mainly women, while male lineages from the original Neolithic population survived for at least another 1,000 years, something not seen anywhere else. These Neolithic lineages, however, were replaced from the Iron Age and are vanishingly rare today. Okay, so a bunch of ladies showed up. Why was Orkney so different? Dr. Wilson and more of the Orkney-based EASE archaeology, who excavated the links of Nordland. I am Nordland. The double L is really kind of throwing me off. The answer may lie in the long-term stability and self-sufficiency of farmsteads on Orkney, which the genetic data suggests may have already been male-dominated by the peak of the Neolithic. They may have been uniquely placed to weather harsher times and maintain their grip on the population as newcomers arrived. This implies that Orkney was much less insular than has long been assumed, and that there was a protracted period of negotiation between the indigenous males and the newcomers from the south over many generations. This shows that the 3rd millennium BC expansion across Europe was not a monolithic process, but was more complex and varied from place to place, explained Dr. George Foodie, one of the lead researchers. The results have been surprising for both archaeologists and geneticists on the team, although for different reasons. The archaeologists did not expect such large-scale immigration, whereas the geneticists did not foresee survival of the Neolithic male lineages. The university's director of the Evolutionary Genomics Research Center said, "This research shows how much we still have to learn about one of the most momentous events in Europe." Okay, that didn't... Okay, so that's interesting. So it seemed that you had your farmers there. They probably kept their farms in family line and passed it down through the males, and you'd need to get your wives elsewhere, I guess. And a lot of people were coming in from north of the Black Sea, so there you go. Bring in the wives, I guess is what they did. Post-mortem interval of human skeletal remains, accurately determined by means of non-destructive techniques. Let's see. A new study has determined the post-mortem interval Sorry, I thought I was going to sneeze. A new study has determined the postmortem interval of human skeletal remains using real samples, which has been made possible by a combination of 2 non-destructive analytical tools, Raman spectroscopy and chemometrics. This opens up new avenues for dating in the field of forensic medicine and anthropology. Okay. In the field of forensic analysis, there is significant demand for objectivity determining the postmortem interval when human skeletal remains are discovered. So far, a whole range of techniques have been used to establish the approximate time that has elapsed since the death of an individual, but they have significant drawbacks in terms of reliability and accuracy to provide an approximate interval but not an exact date. They are relatively invasive techniques which require staining or removing of a part of the bone. The aim of this research has precisely to come up with a method capable of determining the relatively accurate postmortem interval in human remains. They analyzed 53 actual human skeletal remains with a known postmortem interval, and they built and validated a model by combining 2 non-destructive tools. Raymond's spectra, Bartolome went on to explain, contains physiochemical information on nearly all the components of the sample. However, due to their complexity, in most cases, it is not possible to differentiate between all the information they contain. Chemometrics is capable of extracting the parameters of interest from the spectra through mathematical and statistical methods. I'm not quite sure what they're doing. By combining both techniques, we have been able to build a model in which the Raman spectrum of each set of skeletal remains analyzed is associated with a postmortem interval. Relating this spectrum to a time interval is no easy task, and for this we used statistical models and logarithms that allow us to relate each spectrum to a time. So when we receive human skeletal remains for which we don't know the time that has elapsed since death, what we do is an interpolation by inserting these data into the validated model, and that way a relatively accurate postmortem interval can be obtained. The data recorded in the model developed to provide valuable, potential useful, versatile information. Okay, so it seems like they've come up with a statistical model where they analyze the different parts of the body in order to determine how long since death. Okay, cool. Why did 16th century Indian villagers string together the bones of their ancestors? So, nice picture with a lot of vertebra on it. Nearly 200 sticks strung up with human vertebrae have been discovered by archaeologists exploring tombs in Peru's Chincha Valley, dating back to the turbulent period of early colonization about 500 years ago. These reconstructed spines may represent attempts by indigenous groups to salvage and put back together the remains of their ancestors. The archaeologists who published their findings in Antiquity Today argue that this practice may have been a response to tomb destruction by Europeans who mounted campaigns to stamp out Indian religious practices in the 16th century. Thanks to river water that flows from the Andes to Chincha Valley is a fertile oasis in an otherwise arid environment near the Pacific coast, about 130 miles south of Lima. The Chincha kingdom flourished in the area from around 1000 to 1400 CE, and it included a wealthy, organized society with merchants, seafarers, farmers, and a well-regulated oracle. Well-regarded oracle. I was like, how is the oracle? Yes, well-regarded. In the 15th century, they were subsumed into the Inca Empire, but notably, they maintained some autonomy. The Inca Palace at Oaxaca La Centinela, the major Chincha site in the lower part of the valley, is uncharacteristically small, overshadowed by a much larger Chincha complex. Written sources indicate that a Chincha leader even sat beside Inca Emperor Atahualpa when they first encountered the Spanish. It seems to be one of the few documented cases of an alliance that was forged between the Inca and a complex polity. South American civilizations are not talked about enough. It's so interesting, and there was a lot of political happenings going on. It's really cool stuff, and they had amazing civilizations, beautiful artwork. I got to work in Peru a few years back, and the pottery art that they have is completely unique and absolutely beautiful. So Bongers was not yet in graduate school when he traveled to the area in 2012 with a field expedition led by archaeologist Charles Stanish of UCLA. One day, the group surveyed the less studied part of the Middle Valley. There, they found the remains of hundreds of stone burial chambers known as chulpas, which had not been systematically investigated before. Inside some of these tombs, they discovered several reed posts curiously threaded with human vertebrae. We weren't really sure what to make of it, Bongers said. We initially thought probably some looters came in here and made a joke. Then we kept finding more. So, you got all the vertebra, well, not all of it. There's actually still a lot not here. You don't have any of the lumbar. Even the skull is part of it. Looks like it might be a rib there. Over the next few years, the researchers would return to the region to examine the chulpas across the valley. They documented 192 examples of the vertebra on sticks found alongside other bones and occasionally other artifacts like textile bundles. Just the sheer number of these, I think, is the most shocking bit, Bonger said. An analysis of the remains became the basis of his doctorate work at UCLA. So, yeah, that's a lot, 192. The bones come from adults and children alike and appear to have been taken from already decomposed remains. The vertebrae don't show evidence of cut marks, and many of them are strung up out of order. According to the study, Bonger says he spoke to farmers in the region about the tombs. They had come across the bones on sticks and assured him these were not the work of recent looters or vandals. The farmers were convinced these specimens were old, though how old was unclear. It also just seemed unlikely that modern looters would spend so much time and effort to create these items. That would have taken a long time. Confirmation of the age of these remains came through radiocarbon dating of a few samples. The dates the researchers obtained from the vertebra fall in a range between 1520 and 1550 CE. The reeds, meanwhile, date from about 1550 to 1590, which coincides with the time period the Spanish arrived in Chincha. Two Bongers and his colleagues, this timeline points to a tentative explanation. The vertebrae were collected by previously buried disjointed human remains and put on reeds as a deliberate mortuary practice, developed perhaps in response to European destruction of the tombs. When he put the empirical data in the larger cultural context, the interpretation, I think, is quite compelling. And Tiffany Tung, an anthropologist at Vanderbilt University in Tennessee, who has studied pre-Hispanic treatment of the dead in the Andes but wasn't involved in the New Antiquity paper. Just a few generations after forming their alliance with the Inca, the Chinchas were devastated by the Spanish conquest. Written sources indicate that in 1533, there were 30,000 Chincha heads of household. Within 50 years, the number dropped to 979. Holy cow, that is sad. They suffered from famine, disease, and harsh political and religious suppression, including the ransacking of graves. Written sources even describe some of the destruction. For example, Pedro Cieza de Leon, a 16th century conquistador and chronicler, wrote that in the Chincha region specifically, there was an enormous number of graves in this valley, in the hills and wastelands, and claimed that many were opened by Spaniards. And they removed large sums of gold, but it was not only a quest for riches that drove this grave robbing. It is not just looting from the greedy conquistadors, says Tung. What was he again? He was a conquistador and chronicler. Okay. It was part of the systematic policy to go in and destroy Andean cemeteries and Andean mummies. So sad. Andean societies had very tactile relationships with the dead. Creating mummies was part of a tradition that stretched back thousands of years, before even the Egyptians were making mummies on the other side of the world. By the time of the Inca Empire, the mummies of deceased leaders were kept on view in their palaces. The preserved bodies of family members were venerated, given offerings, and sometimes taken out of their chulpas to be paraded during festivals. Andean societies at this time were concerned with the wholeness of the dead body, which may have represented social order and memory, Bongers and his colleagues wrote in the study. The Europeans, however, viewed this veneration of the dead as heretical to their Christian practice. In Peru, the Spanish led systematic campaigns to destroy objects of indigenous worship, a colonial policy that scholars called the extirpation of idolatry. When you view it in that light, it becomes more tenable to imagine them going back into these burial grounds and trying to reconstitute their ancestors. Bonner said he hopes future research could provide more insights about the genetic history of those buried in these tombs and others who were part of the Chincha kingdom. As part of a previous study, Bongers and his colleagues analyzed DNA from the remains in Chincha Valley, Chulpa, that contained the bones of more than 100 individuals and 8 examples of sticks with vertebrae. The results, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2020, indicated that the dead in these tombs surprisingly originated in the North Peruvian coast. These individuals were perhaps mandated to move south under a new Inca policy of forced resettlement. We have yet to find the local genetic signature of the Chincha people, but there is more DNA work that is being done right now. The story is certainly not closed at this point. Wait, so while they were alive, they were forced? Indicated that the dead in this tomb surprisingly originated in the North Peruvian coast. These individuals were... Okay, so yeah, the people originated there, and while they were alive, they moved south. Okay. Not that the remains were there, and then to preserve their ancestors, they moved them south. I wonder how far they moved them, if they were trying to preserve them. And is it from graves that were already destroyed? Did the conquistadors go in, destroy some graves, and then the locals come in and try to put it back together? Or was it they knew that the conquistadors were coming around and destroying, so they went and found the ones that they knew where they were to save them? Probably the first one, because they were mummifying and trying to keep things together. You would have had more than what is here. You would have had a lot more, maybe. I don't know. It's interesting and very, very sad. Yeah, just messing with the dead of other in such a disrespectful way. It sucks because a lot of indigenous history is just lost because of religious wars, basically. That was an interesting article. Okay, an early Pleistocene hominin in Israel. So we're going to a completely different part of the world. A new paper in Scientific Reports documents the discovery of 1.5 million year old hominin vertebra from the Ubaidiyah site in the Jordan Valley of Israel. I think I read about this. It was unearthed in 1966. Vertebra belonged to a 6 to 12-year-old individual. Based upon the size of this vertebra, the authors project that it was tall for his age. He would have reached a height of over 180 centimeters had he reached adulthood. Okay, what is that in American? Centimeters to feet. What was it, 120? No, 180. So, I was going to say, like, that's not tall. Okay, so 5'9". .9 feet, so not 5'9", but almost 6 foot. Okay. A comparative anatomical study was first conducted between 3 pre-sacral vertebrae of humans and Pan. Pan is chimpanzees and bonobos. The morphology was more like Homo and less like vertebra in Pan or Australopithecus. Specifically, is closer to the vertebra of K&M TWT 1500 Turkana boy. So another relatively young individual, male, who wasn't fully grown yet. An early Pleistocene subadult specimen from East Africa. The best conclusion is that the vertebra belongs to an early Pleistocene Homo, as this ancient human is similar in size to other large hominins found in East Africa, and is different from the short-statured Australopithecines and primates that lived elsewhere. So here we have the vertebra, it's the body of it. The body of it is, it's just the part that actually provides a lot of structure. It doesn't have the cord going through it. This right here looks like it would have been where the attachments for those vertebra go, although it looks like, it's hard from pictures, it still had some stuff to do, some fusing and everything. This specimen is significant in that it was found in the Levant. This area has been a corridor between Africa and Eurasia for quite a long time and provides a roadmap of human dispersal patterns out of Africa. But compared relatively abundant early Pleistocene record of East Africa, currently only 4 hominin specimens have been discovered dating to the early Pleistocene outside of Africa, none of which come from the Levant. Therefore, the prehistoric site of Ubaidiyah is one of the few places that contain preserved remnants of the early hominin exodus from Africa, and the only hominin remains of this age in the corridor out of Africa. So, nice. Interesting. It's not much, just single vertebra. Alright. This is the same one. Okay, we will go away. 5 fascinating Ice Age finds discovered in Yukon permafrost. So as things warm up and things melt, we're finding all kinds of things in the ice, perfectly preserved. In Canada's Yukon Territory, towering pine and spruce forests drape over rolling hills, and the Yukon River and its winding tributaries cut valleys into the landscape. Winters in this northwest corner of Canada are harsh, but the warm summer months are illuminated by sunshine until midnight. Okay, though moose outnumber people by almost twofold, the Yukon has a bustling mining industry, and 14 First Nations groups have thrived on the land for thousands of years. They are descended from the last waves of ancient peoples who journeyed over the Bering Land Bridge from what is now Siberia at least 15,000 years ago, before the crossing flooded at the end of last glacial period. Commonly known as the Last Ice Age, the last glacial period began about 100,000 years ago. During this time, most of North America was covered in glaciers, but conditions in what's now the Yukon were too dry for glaciers to form. Because most of the world's water was locked up in ice, sea level is estimated to have been as much as 500 feet lower than it is today. This revealed the floor of the Bering Sea, creating a passage between Alaska and Siberia known as Beringia. Ancient animals made the journey tens of thousands of years before humans, and the Yukon became a vibrant home for giant creatures known as megafauna. Woolly mammoths migrated to North America from Europe and Asia, and generations of Ice Age horses originated in North America may have crossed the land bridge more than once. Giant ancestors of camels, sloths, lions, hyenas, and many other populated the landscape. When these animals died, their bodies likely decomposed, and anything that anything that wasn't scavenged became part of the frozen ground. Permafrost's cool touch perfectly preserves nearly anything within it, including DNA. Ancient genes can be easily extracted from bones and soft tissue, and scientists have even found intact genetic material in soil samples. Today, scientists now know these animals lived and died because their bones and bodies are so well preserved in permafrost. First Nations people have deep historic knowledge of Ice Age animals as well as their fossils. Likewise, since the Klondike Gold Rush at the turn of the 20th century, miners have uncovered many gargantuan bones, Ice Age relics that continue to be found en masse at mines and riverbanks today. As climate change advances, permafrost is also thawing rapidly and releasing its contents, a gold rush of sorts for paleontologists. Yes, we must go in and grab these before they're gone. Okay, so nearly perfectly preserved wolf pup. Zur, a mummified wolf pup who lived some 57,000 years ago, was found by a miner in Canada's sparsely populated Yukon Territory, where a permafrost has preserved remarkable paleontological finds for millennia. I mean, you got his teeth, his lips are friggin' preserved, you got his nose. He had a nice, light brown fur, too. Okay, a western camel bones. Yeah, I bet you didn't know camels originated here. Western camels, Latin name Camelops hesternus, translated to yesterday's camels in Latin. The bones rearranged the Camelidae family tree by providing concrete evidence that the animals were closely related to modern camels instead of llamas, according to a 2015 study published in Molecular Biology and Evolution. What scientists have learned, the camel family Camelidae actually originated in North America more than 40 million years ago. Their lineage eventually split into camels and llamas. Ancestors of the dromedary and bacterian varieties familiar today migrated across the Bering Land Bridge, while predecessors of llamas and alpacas moved to South America. Yeah, llamas and horses are actually from the Americas. They walked over and now you only see them in dry desert areas. An Arctic hyena teeth. Ooh, I didn't know there was Arctic hyenas. They have been over 50,000 bones of Ice Age animals found in the Old Crow area in the past, and we only have 2 bones or 2 teeth of this hyena. Zazula told the CBC in 2019, so it's a very rare animal. It was almost like a needle in a haystack. When most people think of hyenas, they likely picture the stout and scrappy scavengers living in African savannas or arid parts of India. The ancestors of the cackling creatures likely resembled today's hyenas, but had tall, powerful legs for running fast. Chasmoporthetes actually evolved in what is now Europe or Asia more than 5 million years ago, and their remains have been unearthed all over the world, including in Mongolia, Kansas, Mexico, and now the Yukon. That is quite the span. That's crazy. They had longer legs, so they weren't stubby little things like we think of hyenas. And I actually didn't know there were hyenas in India, so that's new information to me. Okay, let's see, giant beaver skull. I think one time anyone sees our giant beaver skull, they're like, wow, it must have been a saber-toothed cat and eating people. Larger than most humans, save professional basketball and volleyball players. Oh my gosh, the giant beaver was one of the largest rodents recorded. Holy cow. Larger than most humans? No, just pondweeds. It's almost like kind of anticlimactic, you know? You have these animals that's 7 feet tall that just eats little pondweeds, and you want it to be more dramatic than that, but it's not. Okay. I thought beavers ate meat. Do they not eat meat? I guess not. That's not. I don't know much about beavers. I thought they ate fish. I don't know. At 6 feet long and 220 pounds. Gosh, dang, that's huge. Castaroides ohioensis was about the size of a modern black bear. The tail on this massive rodent resembled that of a muskrat more than today's paddle-tailed Castor canadensis. But giant beavers weren't exactly tree-gnawing, dam-building ecosystem engineers like beavers in the Arctic are now. In a 2019 scientific report, researchers analyzed the chemical signatures in several fossilized bones and teeth found in the Yukon and Ohio, estimated to date back between 10,000 and 50,000 years. 10,000. So that means that people were seeing these things. Basically, the isotopic signature of the food you eat becomes incorporated into your tissues. Yep. Because the isotopic ratio remains stable even after the death of the organism, we can look at the isotopic signature of fossil material and extract information about what the animal was eating, even if that animal lived and died tens of thousands of years ago. Okay. Yeah, so that's a really big beaver. Scimitar cat bone. Crazy. Looks like a short-tailed lion. Because relatively few scimitar cat fossils have been found, scientists theorized that only a smaller population of these fanged felines existed. Per CBC, these humorous made them reassess. 2011, a bone was found in permafrost on a Dominion Creek mining site near Dawson City. It belonged to a scimitar cat, not to be confused with a saber-toothed cat. Scimitar cats have shorter, dagger-shaped canines with serrated edges. unlike their famed relatives, those whose teeth typically measured a frightening 7 inches long. However, since the bone was so well preserved in icy permafrost, researchers at the University of Copenhagen were able to sequence its entire genome. They found that the specimen's parents were only distantly related, which means the population was large enough to be genetically diverse, more than modern cat species like African lions and lynx, according to a comparative analysis. Because so much is known about modern human and animal genetics, researchers can identify certain physical details associated with specific genes, and then infer how the ancient creature may have behaved, said study author Thomas Gilbert, an evolutionary genomicist at the University of Copenhagen. Interesting. Oh, you won't let me. Yeah, let's do it. Okay, yeah. So it looks like this is different genes. Circadian clock for this gene. The vision type it has, so feline vision, social behavior, and then the nervous system, respiratory system, hypoxia, adipogenesis. I have a feeling that has to do with fat, mitochondria, respiration, and circulatory system angiogenesis. Interesting. So, it seems they were fit to live in cold climates in probably a high elevation with hypoxia. They were very social creatures, I guess. Feline eyes. Nice. That's cool. Alright. And that's it for that one. Cool stuff. Who would win in a real-world battle, a Bengal tiger or a ram? We're not gonna go over that one. How exercise boosts the brain and improves mental health. No. Earliest modern humans in Europe. A new paper in Science Advances documents the discoveries from Grotte Mandrin in the Rhone Valley in southern France. 9 teeth and hundreds of stone tools have been excavated. These teeth represent... These teeth represent 7 individuals, one of which comes from a child and is taxonomically a Homo sapiens that dates between 56,000 to 51,700 years ago. The 8 other teeth belong to Neanderthals. This makes this assemblage the earliest evidence of modern humans' occupation in Eastern Europe. Previously, the arrival of modern humans in Europe was thought to be sometime around 43 to 45,000 years ago, based upon remains found in Italy and Bulgaria. The last known Neanderthal remains were around 40,000 to 42,000 years ago. Therefore, the remains from Grotte Mandrin push the understanding of modern human presence in Europe by 10,000 years sooner. So we got the teeth going on here. Molars, upper molars, lower molars, that's okay. Lots of teeth, nice. Some fragments. Equally curious is that the Homo sapiens remains were found nestled in between Neanderthal remains. It is the first time we have found evidence of alternating Homo sapiens and Neanderthal remains in the same site with rapid rotation. This occurred at least twice the site. Twice at the site. With this pattern of occupation of at least two human species at this site and the new dating of modern humans present in Europe at least 10,000 years earlier than we understood before, we think we have more evidence to refute the theory that Neanderthals were rapidly replaced. Based upon the lithic assemblage, the authors were able to identify that the Homo sapiens and Neanderthal stone tools were distinct in style. They did not show any signs of cultural changes in napping or flaking. The Homo sapiens style was Neronian, smaller and more gracile than the Mousterian culture of the Neanderthal. Yeah, but you didn't know Neanderthals had a specific style of stone tool making that completely separates them from that of Homo sapiens. I'd like to know if they were coming across each other and we know that they interbred, why was technology not being passed around? Like, why would you not see what that person over there is making and be like, that could be useful? It could have been the hunting styles were completely different. One of the theories around how Neanderthals hunted was they were kind of like rodeo clowns, and they tackled their prey after stabbing it multiple times. So they would have to get really close to their prey, whereas the Homo sapiens liked things kind of a bit farther, which makes a huge difference. Sorry. Remarkably, however, the authors were able to identify that the overlap of the two groups spanned only 1 year by looking at soot deposits. So it is very likely that they bumped into one another. The reason why I mention that is that the flint used by modern humans came from hundreds of kilometers away and likely came from indigenous Neanderthals. Ooh. What's left to do is an ancient DNA analysis of these teeth to understand if any admixing happened, like it with the remains from Bako Kiro cave in Bulgaria, where 3% of those modern humans' DNA came from Neanderthal. Yes, there's not much here. I wanted more. Okay, so interesting. They may have been flint napping in their own way, but they were exchanging materials. I am excited to learn about the DNA analysis. Yes, I am. Okay, next. Portable toilets of the ancient Roman world. I don't really want to do toilets today. What is this? No, just allow. How was Stonehenge built? Why is this? I thought we figured it out. I'm not doing it. Stonehenge, no thanks. German, Austria repatriate dozens of human skulls to Hawaii. Hey, look at that. Earlier this month, when was this written? Is it this month? It doesn't say. Okay. Sometime this year. I've been collecting these for a while. A Hawaiian delegation retrieved 58 sets of ancestral remains from 5 European museums. Around 1880, German naturalist Otto Finch stumbled onto an ancient burial ground in Waimanalo, near Honolulu, on the Hawaiian island of Oahu. Eager to send the centuries-old skeletons back to Europe for scientific analysis, a common colonialist practice, Finch took almost everything in the way of usable skulls and just left broken ones, as well as perhaps a dozen without lower jaws. Last Friday, a group of Hawaiians stood on a stage in Berlin, some 7,500 miles from home, to conduct a somber ceremony in front of boxes draped in black cloth. It was a scene they'd repeated several times over the past week as they traveled to 4 cities in Germany and 1 in Austria on a mission to retrieve 58 ancestral human remains, or iwi kupuna, long held at scientific institutions. 23 skulls removed from Waimanalo nearly 150 years ago numbered among the repatriated remains. We acknowledge the anguish experienced by our ancestors and take responsibility for their well-being and thereby our own by transporting them home for reburial. So the delegation leader, Edward Ayau, a Hawaiian lawyer at the longtime repatriation advocate, in remarks made on Friday. We got a picture of them. Just the remains draped in black. So they're hoping for more repatriation. Interesting. I wonder if they got any decent data that, let me see. Some German collectors dug up remains from historic cemeteries without securing permission. Others sent back the bones of locals killed by colonial forces. In Namibia, Germany perpetrated what some historians consider the first genocide of the 20th century, killing an estimated 65,000 Herero and 10,000 Nama people between 1904 and 1907. Okay, this is... Though he rejected the aspects of the scientific racism, social Darwinism, prominent in his day, Lucian's unethical collecting practices nevertheless left a material legacy of modern anthropologists are still trying to reckon with. Okay. That's good. So he wasn't going for, like, racist things, but yeah, taking things without permission is a no-no. Anyways, so that's cool, you know, repatriating things. It gets really difficult when it's like, because you're dealing with different governments, especially if they have things like native tribes and stuff in one country. In the U.S., we have many federal and state laws when you're dealing with Native American remains, or in this case, Native Hawaiian. When you're dealing with other countries, it's going to become a long and tedious process to get things given back, really. You know, lots of red tape for bureaucracy and such. Oh, that is not archaeological. I don't know. I'm getting burnt out, guys. I'm getting burnt out. Yeah, I'm gonna call it. I've been going for an hour and 20 minutes. That's not bad. Not bad at all. But I was in the field today having to do some excavations, and it's tiring after a while. Anyways, I am going to go ahead and sign out. If you guys are interested, join the Discord, and I hope to see you guys there. I tried organizing a trivia night. I'm going to do that again. I guess it wasn't really trivia, it was more of a game show type thing. What is it? Jeopardy, that's the name of it. Kind of a Jeopardy type situation, but I also like to, you know, watch shows. We talk sometimes. I'll link the articles that I discuss on the stream, and you can take a look at the original sources. A lot of these are just the, like, news report of these. If you are actually interested in reading what the researchers are publishing, they have their references, especially Science Daily. They'll list it, so you can go and see if you can get the actual research paper rather than just a journalist rewriting a shorter version for you. Yeah, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed the stream, and I hope you guys have a wonderful evening.